So yeah, folks, thanks so much for joining. I'm Siadhal, co-founder at a company called Metaview. We started Metaview in 2018 with a mission to build the AI co-pilot for hiring. And we're starting out with a very specific and special focus on recruiting teams running better interview processes. So I've seen firsthand, as sort of many other members of the team, that during hyper-growth, it's really the interview process where your hiring process sort of wins or fails, yet it's still sort of super unreliable, really prone to error, really prone to bias, and contains a whole lot of grind and drudgery. And so that's what we set out to change with Metaview. We work with some amazing customers, companies like Brex, Pleo, TripleDot, AngelList, Pure Storage, Robinhood, and really the last 6 to 7 months of innovation that you've seen off the back of the sort of the foundational large language models that have been made available to people like you and companies like us has really been a game changer for our product and therefore our customers as well. So you can definitely color me an AI optimist, and I'm here, I guess, to share my perspective about what it's going to mean for us in recruitment through as positive a lens as I believe in. Now, there's been a whole lot of talk across industries, not just in recruiting, but across all sorts of industries, about the impact, potentially the negative impact that AI is going to have on labor generally. It's not just a recruiting thing, obviously. Even jobs that we've long considered to be some of the most high-skill or most creative, job roles on the planet seem to be being disrupted by AI. So that's things like doctors, software engineers, music artists, authors suddenly seem at threat from this new technology. For software engineers, we've got headlines that AI co-pilots are going to be responsible for writing 80% of code in the next 5 years. That sounds potentially scary. Music artists like Drake had a really convincing clone sort of generated that ended up making music that a lot of people thought was pretty damn good. For a while now, AI has been outperforming doctors on some tasks that were long considered the reserve of the doctor, identifying health issues in a scan or an X-ray. And now me, personally, I used to buy a lot of children's books for my kids. I still buy a few, but a lot of the time I just generate a customized child story via ChatGPT, read it to them, and it does a really great job. So even those really creative jobs seem to be getting disrupted. But it's not just journalists and experts who have an opinion on AI. It feels like everyone's got an opinion. I'm sure a bunch of the talks you've been to today already were covering this topic. It's really hard to get away from. And frankly, a lot of that time, that opinion is quite what I would describe doomsday. It's doom-mongering. It sort of reminds me of this meme where, listen, we're just here to have a few drinks, talk about hiring, and people are getting in my ear about, it's the end of days. So while I can't pretend to be able to predict the future, obviously, of every job role in any great detail, what I do know are a few things. One, any technological innovation that we as a species have ever been responsible for has led to more output for less effort. That's essentially what technology is. If you work in tech, you're trying to create more output for less effort. It's also resulted in higher paying, safer, frankly, better, more creative jobs. So two very good things, I would say. Better jobs, more output as a result of those jobs. What's also very true is that whenever technological disruption has occurred in the past, there are people that get left behind along the way. So we shouldn't act like there's no cost whatsoever. And during these previous revolutions, of course, there's people who get left behind. And it's really those that are brave enough and adaptable enough that make the most of what quickly becomes the new normal. So the point that I really want to make to folks today is that the best way to approach the AI revolution is not to see it as a threat, but to see it as an opportunity. It's an opportunity to do more higher impact, higher leverage work, and I want to talk through a few examples in a moment. Work that involves more of the tasks we essentially love and maybe represent the reason we got into recruiting in the first place, and less of the tasks that actually we pretty much hate. So, where human interactions and relationships are king, where robotic admin is delegated and relegated to the robots, and where recruitment processes are just awash with insight and collaboration in a really seamless, easy way. So it's in fact my belief that AI will save recruitment from a lot of that drudgery that I just talked about. I actually think recruitment is especially well placed to be a beneficiary of this AI revolution when you compare it to lots of other white-collar jobs. And that's for a really simple reason that actually people in recruitment have been beating the drum about for a long time, which is recruitment is probably the most human-centric part of any organization. It is the thing that focuses on getting human beings into this organization, influencing them, persuading them to join, understanding what type of human being you're looking for. It's the most human thing. It involves a lot of nuanced, synchronous interactions with candidates. They could be, or also with hiring managers as well. You're expected to make and aid judgments about those human beings. I think those things are really going to be some of the last things that get handed over to AI. It's really everything else that we're going to be able to jettison. And so for recruiters and recruiting leaders, what that means is essentially our roles are going to have a lot less drudgery and a lot less guesswork in them, and a lot more time in your zone of genius taking informed action. That's the before and after that we should be striving towards, and frankly, I think that's going to take place, and therefore we need to adapt to. For this talk, I really want to focus on the first part of that, which is drudgery. And the reason I want to focus on AI saving us from drudgery is because, frankly, it's so powerful. Because if we can move away from some of the more drudgerous tasks involved in recruiting, it frees up time for more of the things, again, that we love about it. Spending time with people, influencing people, persuading, understanding. Time spent in what a lot of folks have long considered their real zone of genius. Let me show you what I mean. Would love to know if this looks familiar to anyone.
Hi, Jim. I'm really excited to be interviewing for your company today. Oh, and I just want to say how appreciative I am of this opportunity. I can kick off by giving a bit of an introduction about my past work experiences and how I ended up applying for the role. When I saw for the role, I thought that my background aligned well with the experiences and technical skills. And I also read up on your background. I've been working at a big company for the past few years, so I'm excited about the opportunity to work for a startup.
Okay, I had to have made some kind of a dent by now.
Oh, Jim, sorry. Jim, can you hear me?
Oh, come on! Oh,
Jim? Are you even there?
this is gonna suck up my whole life.
Jim?
Yes, to all.
I guess the interview's done.
Yeah, there you go. Now everybody's happy.
I bet Jim has never heard of Metaview, an app that writes AI-generated interview notes for you. That way, he would have saved all that typing, and he would have actually heard what I was saying.
Ladies and gentlemen, this just in. Possibly the biggest breaking news story this town has ever seen.
Cool. So I hope the fee we paid Jim for that video was worth it, because it was quite a wedge. But the whole point there is that Jim was not being human, right? He really could have been anyone in that interaction. It didn't certainly have to be him. It could have been any other person. Frankly, it probably could have been a robot if all you're going to do is type down what the person says and make a very high-level judgment about them after the fact. He was not engaging with the candidate. He was not being curious. He was not influencing them. Again, he could have been anyone. And obviously, that's not the only sort of drudgerous task we have. I've just made a list of a few just to, I guess, demonstrate what I mean by more time in our zone of genius. The future, the very near future, there's going to be a lot less time spent scouring the internet for profiles, a lot more time spent truly understanding the business's needs or the hiring manager's needs, or even more likely, helping them understand their needs based on your thorough understanding of the market. There's going to be a lot less time spent on reviewing what end up being irrelevant applicants to a role, and much more time spent meeting relevant candidates. Far less time on scheduling candidates and interviewers, which is a complete pain. Much more time actually preparing candidates and preparing interviewers for the process so you get the outcome that the organization needs. Less time on superficial connections with many, many candidates, and more time on deep connections with few. Less time and energy spent transcribing what candidates say and then writing up some summary of that into your ATS or CRM. And much more time actually engaging with what candidates are saying, reacting to it, and having a conversation. And lastly, in this obviously limited list, less time corralling and nagging interviewers. And there's nothing that whenever I speak to customers that folks hate more than being the person who has to, Slack and then email and then talk to the manager of someone who hasn't given them their feedback. You're going to spend much less time doing that and much more time actually advising interviewers and HMs. So last thing on this, when I talk about drudgery, what do I really mean? I essentially mean those tasks for me represent the things you do in between planning and performing. As any organization, as any individual, if you're trying to be a high performer, you want to spend as much as your time either in the planning phase, so making a great plan, or in the performing phase, executing that plan. What really happens a lot of the time, and recruiting is no different, is we spend a bunch of our time on everything in between. And what AI is going to mean for us is we move to a world where that's flipped. Actually, we spend much more time on the planning of our execution and a lot more time on the actual performance, the things we plan to do, and much more time on the work about work in between. And I think what you'll also therefore see is as you move to this more bimodal sort of way of operating, you'll actually see more specialization within recruitment too. You'll get those folks who are, great with people, great at influencing, have really great soft skills. They'll spend more time performing in their zone of genius. The folks who are really great at making the plans, building the systems, they'll spend more time in their zone of genius, and there'll be these two separate roles that sort of more consistently emerge. Many great companies already have that, recruitment operations and recruiter split. I think that will become more common. Cool. So that's the theory anyway, but theory pretty much sucks. So why don't we actually demonstrate what we mean? So let's talk some real examples. So obviously, I'm going to focus on the interview process because that's what I've been nerding out about for the last, 5 to 7 years or so. And we're going to go into how can we go about removing drudgery for recruiters and interviewers. So as I mentioned, Metaview is an AI assistant for your interviews. It's essentially an assistant that's exceptionally good at just a couple of things. One of those things is taking a recruiter's notes for them, and the other one is being able to recall essentially anything that happened in any of your conversations ever, which is a real superpower. So let's jump in. Hopefully this, here we go. No, you don't want to see that. There we go. Great. So this is what I, as a recruiter, get after I run an interview where I'm making use of Metaview. What you can see there in the center of the screen is completely generated by AI. So I've had a conversation with a candidate. Metaview has identified the questions that I asked during the course of that conversation, and then has bullet point summarized the answers that the candidate gave. So again, it hasn't just transcribed the answer. It's actually understood the semantics of the question. What were you trying to understand via this question? And pulled out the most important information for the whole interview. So now, when I run interviews, I don't even take notes at all. I purely focus on engaging with the candidate, getting to understand them, because I know I've got an AI assistant that is going to do a 10x better job than I ever could of taking notes. Not only that, though, after I've, of course, got my notes, which I might decide, this is a little bit too much information. Metaview, can you make that more succinct, please? So just in the click of a button, I reduce some of the fluff and make it more succinct. And actually, you know what? Maybe I don't want it in bullets. I want it in paragraphs. So stylistically, these are my notes. I'm just telling Metaview to make the change. So these are still, again, very much my notes. At some point, I'm happy with my notes. I decide, OK, I want to start to fill in my scorecard now. So what my Metaview AI assistant can do is it pings the ATS, asks the ATS, hey, what are all the fields in the scorecard or the feedback form for this role? Because I want to help Siadhal fill that in. And so I'm going to jump over to that scorecard form now. We can see this is our feedback form. We use Lever internally, but this applies to a whole range of ATSs. What you can see is that some things are already filled in, and some things aren't. This is a completely fresh interview. So the reason that some things are filled in is because Metaview has identified the ATS here is asking for some objective information out of the conversation. Recruiters, interviewers, we're not going to be filling in those facts anymore. That's something a robot can do, again, far better than me. Metaview has listened through the conversation and summarized the previous experience of the candidate for me. Now, obviously, I can go in and edit that and change things if I'm not happy with it. But essentially, the initial work, the few minutes that, that each of these boxes takes to fill in, where I'm just expected to essentially regurgitate something the candidate told me, goes away. That's drudgery. Anyone can do that. Therefore, I don't want to do it anymore. Where the form requires judgment, like, of course, an overall recommendation, or in this case, communication skills, that's a judgment, right? We're not asking our AI assistants to judge that for us. I'm going to be the judge of that. But what's pretty cool is that Metaview can still help me. So if I say, yeah, I'm going to do a bad version here, but yeah, great. And I decide that some of this is actually really good evidence of this. Yeah, they handled conflicts with a colleague really well. I'm going to drag and drop that in. And again, I'm just able to evidence my scorecard in just a few seconds, as opposed to those tortuous sort of articulations that you try and fill in to explain why you've come to a certain conclusion. So again, it's something that is 15 to 20 minutes after every interview. I just actually get done in just a few moments. There's also some pretty cool things I can do, like, hey, you know what? I actually think these are pretty much the same topic. Let's merge these. So please rewrite that for me. And again, these are your notes. You just manage them and manipulate them much more seamlessly. Cool. OK, so to refresh, I've run an interview. I've focused on the candidate. I feel like I've got a really good feel for them because I was truly present. I've started to fill in my scorecard now. Maybe I decide to submit that to the ATS. That goes through and is stored in the ATS where it needs to be. Great. What I also want to do is, in advance of the hiring manager talking to this candidate, is just give them a bit of a one-paragraph summary. I just want to let them know what to expect when they're interviewing this candidate. And I spoke to them let's say it's a few days ago now, and I don't have everything completely top of mind. So what I'm going to do is come to this section, and I'm going to ask this AI to help me craft a single paragraph summary of this candidate. So let's see. First of all, what topics do I want to include? So what Metaview's done for me, which is pretty cool, is it's pulled out the topics that were covered in the interview. Again, completely automatically, it has identified the topics. And let's say I want to talk about compensation, company culture, future goals, and career overview in my summary. And you'll see at the bottom here, it started to write my high-level summary for me. So the candidate stated they wanted this salary. They've worked as a software engineer at a small company before joining Google. The candidate asked about the company culture. OK, this is good. It's a little bit light on details, so I want a little bit more. So I want to tell Metaview, tell me more about their career, please. Just a few clicks, Metaview fills in the rest of their career. And maybe I want a bit more about their future goals. Same thing. It adds a bunch more detail. And now I'm pretty happy with that. Taking me a few seconds, a few clicks, and I can now give a really well-written, really thoughtful summary to the candidate. The reason I love this example so much is because it's a great example of where human and machine interacts. The part of the job that I did was choosing the topics. All Metaview knows is these are the things we covered. It obviously doesn't know what is the most important thing to this hiring manager. What is the most important thing to this organization? That's a lot of the time quite tribal or institutional knowledge that I, as the recruiter, I'm going to understand. So I'm choosing the topics. Again, I'm just not doing the grind, the drudgery of actually regurgitating or formatting those sentences in a way that is super consumable, I can get Metaview to do that for me. So that's one thing I really love about it. It's a great example of how we can interact. The other reason I love it is because it's like the start of my relationship with my AI assistant, right? First time I used Metaview, I came here, it obviously hadn't written a summary for me because it didn't know the stuff that I cared about. But now, next time, when I come in, it's going to know, OK, so Siadhal seems to care about these topics, so maybe by default, I'll provide him a summary with those topics. He can always go and edit it before he decides to pass it on to an HM. And maybe once I've done that 100 times, and I realize, you know what, 99 times out of 100, it gets it spot on. Maybe I just change my settings, and I just tell Metaview, as soon as I've finished an interview, send a summary to the HM, because I trust that you're going to do a great job of summarizing it in the way that I think makes sense. And so that's the relationship we're going to see over time with our AI tools, where we'll start with them with a lot of oversight. We'll essentially check most or every detail. It will learn over time from how we behave with it and edit it. And then eventually we'll realize, OK, this is doing some parts of my job really well. It's essentially exactly the same way we work with other human beings. If you hire someone who's on a junior member of your team, at first they've got a pretty low, what I would call task level maturity on something. So you probably give them a lot of oversight, give them a lot of coaching, make edits. If you're still doing that with them 6 months later, they're probably not doing a great job. Really, you're going to be training these systems. And so where people are going to end up, people in general, but recruiters as well, are going to end up differentiating and being high performers is the amount of time or effort or thought that they put into what parts of their job they can actually essentially outsource to assistants, how well they train those assistants, which parts they decide still deserve my oversight. Those are the judgments that you're going to make that are going to determine, if you're a 10x recruiter or if you're actually stuck in this messy middle. And again, focus more on those really high impact tasks. Last thing to show you from the product is this sort of superhuman memory that we have. So let's sort of fast forward a few months. Actually, it turned out this candidate wasn't quite right. They were a great fit for the company as a whole. It's just this particular hiring manager had someone else that they favored. There's a new rec that comes up with a new hiring manager, and I think this candidate's going to be great. Having an AI assistant, what would I do? I'd ping them on LinkedIn, see if they're still free, have another chat with them, probably ask all the same questions I did from my first conversation with them, because my notes about the conversation were terrible. Whereas in this case, I review the notes, I realize, yeah, this was a great candidate, but there's a couple of things that I know this HM really cares about, so I want to double check that this candidate has the right stuff. I know he cares a lot about motivation, so I'm just going to ask Metaview there we go. What are the candidate's motivational drivers? So just in natural language, I'm going to ask my assistant, can you go back through this interview and pull out anything we learned about what motivated them? And I can go on with many, many more questions. It's essentially ChatGPT for your interviews, which means you never actually have to forget anything about anything you've learned about candidates you've spoken to in the past. Let's get back to the product, So clearly, I think some of the stuff I've shown is a huge time saver. We actually believe it's a huge quality enhancer as well. But if we save time, if we're going to get so much more efficient, won't that mean that the world sort of needs fewer recruiters? Short answer is no. This is a classic example of what's called a Jevons paradox. So a Jevons paradox is the phenomena where sort of as you increase the efficiency of a resource, it actually leads to overall increases in the usage of that utility, of that resource. So you think that by making light bulbs more energy efficient, we're going to reduce the amount of electricity we use. No, it's the opposite. It makes light more accessible. More people use more light bulbs more of the time, actually. Or in this example here, these new cars are so efficient, everyone's driving everywhere these days. Actually, fuel efficiency leads to more usage of fuel. That's a Jevons paradox. In a recruiter's world, what would these people on the balcony be saying? Well, they'd be saying something like, these recruiters are so efficient that I'd actually rather hire one than try to do this myself, because they're too much more likely to do a better job than I would, because they're truly expert, and therefore it makes sense for me to bring in the specialist. Or these recruiters are so efficient, they do so much more than just get that bum in that seat. So in the future, recruiters will have more and more leverage as they focus more and more on the actual act of hiring and much less on the admin and the grind that surrounds hiring. So really, that's to say it's pretty simple. Recruiters that master and apply these tools will be able to do their job more effectively and more quickly. They will fundamentally represent better value for money for organizations, and they'll thrive because of it. And one thing that is for sure is that avoidance in these situations where there's this technological revolution occurring, avoidance is never, ever the winning strategy. So if I can urge you to do one thing, if you thought what I showed you was cool or if you thought it was terrible, I don't really care about that. What I mainly care about is if you find yourself during your working day doing a bunch of things and you say to yourself, I could do this on autopilot, then you should be aware that very soon an autopilot will start to do those things. So you need to find those areas where actually you're engaging your brain, you're using critical thinking, you're influencing an individual, a sort of a full 360 human being in front of you. Those are the things where you can truly remain differentiated. And guess what? They're a whole lot more fun, they're a whole lot more high impact, they're a whole lot more high leverage as well. This is why this is such a good thing for the recruiting industry. Cool, so that does it.